So this is the review for Chapter 11, the French Revolution and Napoleon. I'm going to keep this rather brief as an explanation and also just as an example as to how some of these videos may come out later on. The first thing that we want to talk about is that you had your first three estates. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because the differences between these are pretty self-explanatory in your book as well as on this slide right here. Just know that the first and second estate comprised of a total of 2% of the total population, and the rest of the 98% was everybody else. But that 2% overwhelmingly owned more of the wealth and paid zero taxes, whereas the common people or everybody else, they had to either contend with relics of feudalism like the peasants had to, which was the formalities of feudalism, not the actual feudalism, or you had the bourgeoisie, which was the actual middle class, which was your doctors and your lawyers and your professional people. So these are the people who were having to pay more in taxes, them being the third estate, than the first and second estate. Your first estate, be it the clergy, and the second estate, be it the nobility. So money issues is what drives the French Revolution all the way from this point in 1878 to 1888 all the way to 1800, 1815, whenever Napoleon is running the show. So we had shortages of food, we had dealings with money because the cost of goods was going up, otherwise there was inflation, and we had a lot of people out of work. A lot of this had to do with France being broke due to military conflict in the 7 Years' War, as well as military conflict in supporting the Americans in their efforts for independence against Great Britain. Also, we had the royal court in Versailles, in particular Marie Antoinette, the king's wife, who was basically spending money like he was going out of style on lavish court accessories. So Louis XVI, the king of France at this time, decides he's going to call the Estates General together. This is the first three estates to get them together for the first time in well over 150 years, and the main goal of this is to raise taxes. Well, the third estate, everybody else, the 98%, is going to take this opportunity to move in a different direction. First, they were successful in getting themselves 600 representatives as opposed to the traditional 300 representatives that they would all have. And they also petitioned Louis to give them one vote per representative because they only thought that was fair since they were the overwhelming majority. Louis didn't contend with that because the idea is the first and second estate would basically agree with whatever it was he wanted to have them do, and they would also look out for their own interests. Also, the third estate wanted to do away with tax exemptions and create a constitutional government. Now, Louis decides that he's not going to let these people meet. They were already pushing their luck with having more representatives, but whenever they started talking about this constitutional government and one representative equals one vote, he decided to lock the doors on the building where they were going to meet for their National Assembly to form their constitution. Well, whenever this happened, they decided to move to another location within Versailles, the tennis court, and swear an oath that they would continue meeting until they had actually formed a constitution. That is called the tennis court oath. Now, at the same time that the third estate was actually going forth with their National Assembly, you also had troops, French troops and foreign troops, massing outside of Paris, which Paris at this, just to keep in mind, is within 15 to 20 miles outside of Versailles, or Versailles is 15-20 miles outside of Paris. Well, they see these troops coming in, and it is believed that these troops were coming to basically break up the National Assembly. Well, this is whenever French citizens in Paris basically took action and decided to storm the Bastille. And a Bastille is a prison armory thing. So they freed all the prisoners, sparking violence all over France, otherwise known as the Great Fear of 1789. This was the beginning of the revolution. And this is how it falls down. The National Assembly did away with the landlord's provisions for finance, as well as those for nobility and clergy. They adopted the Declaration of Rights of Man, which basically was inspired by the Enlightenment and granted these three ideas: equal rights for all men, public office being based on your talent or merit, and ended all the exemptions from the first and second estate for taxation. Now, you did have some females who were upset by the fact that this was very chauvinistic and all geared towards women, so they wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Women and the Female Citizen, but they were largely ignored. Actually, Olympe de Gouges ended up being victim to the guillotine later on in the Reign of Terror. So the king, he wasn't going to actually accept any of these concessions from the National Assembly. Excuse me, not concessions, but demands. But then, the sight of 5,000 Parisian women marching on Versailles demanding bread ends up changing his mind. They talk to him about starving, about having issues with not having enough to eat, and they take him, as well as his wife Marie Antoinette and his son, back to Paris on this 15-20 mile hike, and they are imprisoned. The church lands were thus seized by the National Assembly, and they were sold to individuals, and the church was thus secularized. The National Assembly decided to adopt a new constitution with a limited monarch with a legislative assembly, the details of which not really all that important because this form of government really doesn't last very long. It wasn't received well by hardly anyone. You had other European countries that were freaked out by this use of force against the monarch, so they decided that they would mass their own armies in an idea of restoring the monarch. This prompted the Legislative Assembly to declare war on Austria as well as other countries and try and fight. This is the beginning of the French National Army, this army of citizens. It ends up growing into the fourth largest army in the world at the time. Fourth largest army in Europe. We had political demonstrations leading to the Paris Commune coming into power. They captured Louis XVI, and the National Assembly was dissolved, and they called for the National Convention. And one of the main points of this was universal male suffrage. These people were called the sans-culottes. Alright, that's the end of Section 1. Starting Section 2, radicalism. This is when the wheels of the train come off. We had George Denton running the sans-culottes, and he basically went out and rounded up all the people who did not agree with either the sans-culottes or had supported Louis XVI. We had Jean-Paul Marat, who was a famous writer at this time, who supported these people. The National Convention met, drafts a new constitution, but they're also, that was their main goal, but their other role was to rule France until this government was established. This government was comprised of two-thirds people, all 45 years old or younger, and all their experience in politics had to do with the revolution. So there's a very, very strong distrust for King Louis. The monarch was eventually established. We have these two groups basically split between the idea of how to deal with Louis XVI. Of the two groups, the two groups first were part of the Jacobin, the Girondians and the Mountain, and it's the Mountain that won out in having Louis XVI condemned to the guillotine, and he was killed on the 21st of January 1793. Moving on, the Paris Commune ended up pushing for radical change outside of Paris, where their ideas were not necessarily accepted, because after the king was killed, it's like, dear God, these people are crazy. The killing of Louis XVI also freaked out other countries and heightened their idea of having to move forward with a invasion of France to restore the old monarchy. This brings about the Committee of Public Safety, which their main goal was to defend against any threats to France, be it from outside of France or inside France, either foreign or domestic. It was led by George Denton, but then after that you had the leader that I want you to identify with the Committee for Public Safety, Maximilien Robespierre. So this is the beginning of the Reign of Terror, where the Committee of Public Safety started out with courts persecuting anybody who was opposed to the revolution or opposed to the sans-culottes, but then in this process they ended up killing thousands upon thousands of people. Most of the cities outside of Paris were used as examples to what would happen if you opposed the National Convention's rules. One such city was in Lyon, where 1,800 citizens were executed. Excuse me. You also, why was all this killing? Now, Lyon wasn't the only city where this happened. It was all over Paris. And they were known for killing thousands upon thousands of people using grape shot, which is that shotgun method with a cannon type thing. The idea was to bring about this Republic of Virtue, where after everybody who opposed the revolution would be gone, and you'd have a democratic republic of all good people who wanted to support the revolution and its ideals. These people of the Republic of Virtue were sent out to implement different laws that were basically ignored because they really had no authority at this time. It was just their ideas of virtue, and they thought that if these people were good citizens, they're going to abide by these rules. Another thing that the Reign of Terror and the Committee of Public Safety started doing was a policy known as de-Christianization. They wanted to remove any form of Christian influence on France. So much so that they created a new calendar that was stripped of all Christian holidays and replaced with holidays that accentuated or highlighted the revolution. The idea being that the church was seen as the biggest supporter of not only the old ways but also of the monarchy and just the status quo that it existed for long years. Now, the army that was created by the Committee for Public Safety, this army of the French citizens, ended up becoming the fourth largest in Europe at the time, and they not only pushed back the invasion of the European coalition into France to restore the monarchy, they also conquered areas of Europe. Maximilien Robespierre, he ends up continuing this effort to rein in France's enemies until there were none. It just was a way of keeping the masses under his grip. Eventually, they had to get enough votes to remove him, but removing him wasn't going to be good enough. They had to actually condemn him to the guillotine too, because he had become so blood drunk with power that he was gone mad. So he was condemned to the guillotine, and thus the Jacobins lost their power, and the revolutionary fever died down. This brings about the Directory. The Directory, first, before this could be established, you had churches that were open again, and a new constitution was created. This constitution set up a bicameral house, much like the United States Congress, with a lower and upper house, with an executive committee called the Directory, made up of 5 individuals. But over the 4-year time span that this Directory existed, it was not very popular and was viewed as corrupt, and both the royals and the radicals, and when we say radicals, we're talking revolutionaries, opposed the Directory. This allowed Napoleon Bonaparte to come in and overthrow the Directory with the help of 3 other directors from the committee in a coup d'etat. So, Section 3, Napoleon. First off, born at an island in the Mediterranean that belonged to Italy but was annexed by France. So he was of Italian descent but a French citizen. Ended up going to military school for France, gaining his commission, rose to the ranks rather quickly. And he had actually supported the Directory, saved the Directory from attack from the royals. and it gained their I don't know. I don't want to say trust, but they were grateful that he saved them, but they were also a little bit nervous about him because he was an ambitious person, and France was very taken with Napoleon. He was a very charismatic individual. He did lead a group into Egypt, but this invasion was pretty horrible in terms of its outcome. He was defeated soundly, didn't even make it to India, which we can only surmise whether or not he wanted to go there. Um, and he ended up leaving his troops there. Um, Basically, when the invasion was a disaster, he ended up packing up what he could get, snuck out of Egypt, and snuck right back into France. First thing when he got there, he conspired with the three other individuals on the Directory Committee and conspired to the coup d'etat that replaced the Directory government. Basically, the idea was that the story was that a Jacobin plot was going to come and attack the Council of 500, and they said, here, go over to this area and Napoleon will defend you and save you. Well, once they got there, Napoleon started to basically chastise them and get on this big long diatribe saying how bad they sucked at what they were doing, roughed them up some, and then the military ended up coming in and dissolving power, allowing him and two other directors to come in to create the consulate. Napoleon himself was given the title as first consul, which is absolute power, and then he ended up becoming consul for life, and then Emperor Napoleon the First. So now we're right back to a absolutist ruler. Domestic policies, he did make peace with the church, he being Napoleon, and this was good in restoring stability to the church, but also, remember, Italy, the Apennine Peninsula, is under control of France at this time, so there was some sort of harmonious agreement that needed to be reached with France. So they made peace with the Pope, and the church lands that were seized were not required to be given back to the church. The return of this whole thing was that France adopted or reaffirmed that Catholicism was the national religion of France. You also had an actual civil code of law established, because prior to the revolution you had different sets of laws around the country. So now we have one set of laws that was established, and this set of laws did good to keep some ideas of the revolution, except when women were involved. The government, made up of both royals and revolutionaries, and promotion was based on merit, which was also the same thing that was established for the aristocracy. Whether or not he preserved some of the ideas of the revolution, it's debatable, because you did have a civil code that pushed revolutionary ideas, but you also had the idea that he was a despotic ruler, which is, I don't know, kind of contrary to the ideas of the revolution. Now, his empire, with his fourth largest army, he's fighting a united European coalition, but at the same time he's also fighting Great Britain. So Great Britain is the big thorn in France's side during this whole thing. So on the mainland of Europe you had defeats of Austria, Prussia, and Russia all over Europe, and you had France's Grand Empire, which included the French Empire, which was a enlarged France, the dependent states, as well as the allied states. The big thing is dependent states were basically countries where Napoleon's relatives ruled. But allied states, those were the ones that he conquered, and they were required to join him. Conquered areas extended the ideas of the revolution. Legal equality, religious tolerance, all those wonderful things were extended throughout Europe at the time that France had conquered. Now, the nationalism that fueled the French citizenry and fueled the idea of a united France also fueled European desires to oppose France. There was this idea of hatred for France because of their I don't know, aggressive territorial expansion. The British Navy was the only thing that helped Great Britain from being conquered by Napoleon. One of his big defeats was the Battle of Trafalgar, or Trafalgar, however you say it. Also, you had the continental system that Napoleon set up to try and choke off funds from Great Britain. The idea was that Great Britain could not trade with any other country on the European mainland. The only thing is that there was smuggling that allowed them to get goods as well as markets in other areas of the world. So how did Napoleon go away? First, the continental system was not abided by when it came to Russia. They were trading with Great Britain. Napoleon gets ticked about this and decides to invade Russia in 1812, in June. The Russians at this time were basically retreating, falling back, burning cities and villages and blowing up bridges to deny the French any type of resources, while at the same time requiring them to extend their supply lines. All of this is in an effort to buy time till winter comes, because the Russians know that the winter season is one of their strongest allies when it comes to military conflict. By the time the French got to Moscow, it was October. The city was on fire, and basically winter had already come. So the idea is like, yeah, this is pretty pointless, we need to get out. So they start retreating back into Europe. During this retreat, only 40,000 of the prior 600,000 French made it out of Russia in January of the next year. This defeat basically emboldened the Europeans into attacking France, going all the way into Paris, capturing Napoleon, and exiling him to an island in the Mediterranean called Elba. They reinstated the Bourbon dynasty, with Louis XVII, the brother of Louis XVI, being put in power. This is only temporary because Napoleon gets bored, sneaks back into France, and when he sneaks back in, his former troops see him, and they were required to take him into custody. And he actually said, "Would you fire upon your emperor?" They welcome him back. He comes back to power, regains control of France, gets an army together, rebuilds his forces, and attacks the very first Allied base that he could find, and that being in Waterloo, Belgium. There he is defeated by the Duke of Wellington. This time they exile him out into an island in the Atlantic Ocean, St. Helena. This is the end of Napoleon for your book. This is all of chapter 11 in a short 22-minute video. I think that's a little bit longer than I intended to go, but you get the basic gist of this. Any questions, ask. This is also available to download onto your hard drive through the link that's there. The video should be a WMV file. But other than that, I really can't think of anything else. So let me know if you have any questions. Goodbye.